Good morning, everyone. Live Audiophile Roundtable. This is Steve Westman. Impex Records talks Dan Fogelberg, the behind-the-scenes reissue. Look who I have here, A.B. Fawn of Impex Records. Welcome to the program. How are you? You got your little you like your little dog behind you there, or two dogs? It looks like.
I have two Havanese are hanging out with me today.
There you go. Welcome. Really honored to do this show with you. I'm a big Fogelberg fan, of course. I'm actually really excited too, because I mean, this really introduces Fogelberg to maybe people that haven't listened to Fogelberg before. And I think I want to learn more about why you chose, and I can put it up for everyone. This is the record here, really nicely done by you guys, by the way. This is the Souvenirs record by Impex. It's 50th anniversary. And if you want to tell the folks more about it, I'd like to hear sort of your guys' journey as to how and why Impex chose this record.
First, thank you so much for having my team and I on your show. It's always a joy. And I'm really excited to talk about this album. I actually have it in front of me myself. So, you know, Dan Fogelberg was an iconic singer-songwriter in the 70s. And the album Souvenir was his second studio album, which was released in 1974. And it was on the charts for 27 weeks. And this album really helped Dan establish being, you know, his pivotal. It helped establish his role as a pivotal singer-songwriter in the folk and soft rock genre. So when the album was celebrating its 50th birthday, Iconic Artists Group, which is owned by Irving Azoff, they wanted to enhance the legacy of the artists in their roster, but also because Dan was a really good friend of Irving and was his second client when Irving started the business. Oh, hello from Germany. Yay. So when Souvenirs, so when we were talking about wanting to create something really special that would make, you know, dance fan proud, Irving, Gene Fogelberg, the conversation started with who would be a good fit for this project, and Impex became a natural choice because of our experience working with other legacy artists and celebrating their milestone anniversary. And just as musically, I love this album. I think it's underserved. I love his music. It's, you know, some music you can just listen, and some music you can listen to over and over again. And for me, Dan's music is something that I can listen to over and over again. He's a very soulful artist. He wears his heart on his sleeves, on his music. So I really felt this album, you know, deserves the Impex birthday treatment. And I have a perfect team to help put this together.
Well, that's a good segue. Let's introduce the team. I'll let you do that if you want to. Who do you want to bring up first?
So the team, there's 3 team members on this project. First is Chris Bellman, the mastering engineer.
Well, there he is.
And the second is Chuck Granata, who is the historian who wrote the beautiful liner notes and really gave color to the story and the background of the release of this album. And the third team member who's not here is Bob Donnelly. He's at the show right now in Costa Mesa.
We'll say hi to Bob if he's watching.
Hey, I'm going to see him tomorrow.
Hey, Bob. Well, that's one thing about Fogelberg. I mean, it's the honesty in his lyrics. I think that's what you touched upon, is what we're hearing when you listen to, especially all of his records, but especially to Souvenirs. And I know, and we'll get into it with Chuck as well, because Chuck wrote wrote some beautiful liner notes and detailed liner notes for this record as well, which we'll get into as well. But I really want to know, how was this project? I mean, Souvenirs, Dan Fogelberg, 50th anniversary. It was a long journey. That's what you've mentioned before in some of your posts through Impex, and you and I speaking about it. So what made it such a long journey to get this to where we are right now?
Well, when I first connected with Iconic Artists and Sony Music, their goal was to release it on the anniversary date on 2024. But they were going to do it digitally on streaming with bonus materials. Then they came to Impex and discussed the vinyl release. And when I explained to iconic artists that releasing the vinyl is not going to take 3 months, this is going to be probably a year. So they decided they were going to announce it on the anniversary, and we would have it a few months after. But as we dive deep into the story of Fogelberg, and Chuck was able to interview some of the contributors, the time of getting, scheduling, getting everybody interviewed, getting everybody on the same page took a lot longer than we anticipated. And then in the middle of production, we were between the mastering, getting access to the safety copy of the master tape. We also changed our layout and artwork halfway through production as we started to realize we had, ability to have more photos. Chuck's liner notes were more informative. And we thought, you know what, let's go all out. Let's foil stamp it. Instead of putting a limited edition sticker, let's hand stamp the limited edition number individually. So along the way, we kept expanding the project, and we thought, this is the 50th anniversary. Let's go all in. And I'm so pleased how it turned out for a 33 at the price point we're offering. It's gorgeous, and it sounds gorgeous.
What is the price point, and where do we buy or pre-order this record, and when does it come out?
It's shipping next Friday. The price point is $40. You can order it through Elusive Disc or any of your favorite audiophile online retail stores.
So that leads me to the next part, the process. A lot of our viewers are into process. That's why we have Mr. Chris Bellman on. We know you guys it was a Sony tape that was used. So I want to get right to Chris. Chris, please get in and we can detail the process that you used. I guess it was a Sony 1-to-1 tape, and it does say that, I believe, on the back of this record, back of the record as well. So remastered from 1-to-1 copies of the original analog master tapes by Chris Bellman. So tell us about that.
Okay, so that intro makes it sound like it was an easy process, and it wasn't. There were multiple sources to choose from.
Wow.
Yeah, and we had to get copies of all of them, and we had to preview everything and figure out what was what. In some cases, one side was missing, or there was a song missing, so obviously those couldn't be used. So we finally culled it. Donnelly and I finally culled it down after pretty much a half a day of listening to various sources to the 2 tapes that we wound up choosing. That, for one thing, they were complete, so that was helpful, and 2, they actually sounded better than most of the other ones that we had. So it was kind of a win-win once we discovered it, but it took us about 5 hours to find that. Once we did, then the process was very similar to a lot of other reissue projects. Bob had an original pressing, so we previewed that and kind of figured out where we wanted to take it from the original pressing standpoint. That was our reference. And so we did live, loosely synced to the original pressing and the tapes that we chose. We played them live, and I furiously scribbled down notes sort of live. It's kind of the same process that we do for most reissues. And then I believe there was one song that had a chop that we had to figure out a fade that was on the original master, but there were no notes about it, so we had to figure out what they did. So we had to recreate things like that. Spacing, some of the spaces were oddly different than the record, so we had to kind of pull it together once again using the record.
So Chris,
pressing.
Tell us more about the spacing then. What does that mean to the common folk?
Sorry. The spacing, the space between when one song ends and the next one starts.
Okay.
You can really change the vibe of a side of vinyl by how it's spaced, and so how much time it takes to go into the next song. So anyway, that was getting modified. simultaneously in this process. And what else can I say, Avi? That's pretty much it. Then we cut a reference disc for Mr. Donnelly to peruse and critique. I believe we went through one set of tweaks.
Tweaks, yes.
Tweaks, if you will. They were small, minor things. And I think we cut another test. I can't remember. And then that was it. We were done. We were ready to do the actual lacquers.
Yes.
In a nutshell, that's it.
Can I add something?
Go for it.
Because I think it's always fascinating, especially to the audiophiles. But as Chris knows, we transferred the original master backwards, which some people, hear about, but they don't really understand. So I think it might be beneficial. Chris, can you explain why we did that? I did that with Chris, with Vic Anasini at Sony Music Studios, but there's a reason why.
Right. Good point, Chuck. So originally, the original copies that we got, once we decided which ones we liked, we listened to them, but we thought, the copy could be better. So actually it was my idea to try this backwards thing. I'll take credit for that.
It's great.
And, yeah. And so we requested that, and I'm sure it was received with limited enthusiasm. Let's put it that way. But anyway, they did it, and they ran the tape backwards. So the reason for running it backwards is you maintain more of the transients and how the tape magnetizes better when you run it backwards. And that's if you visualize a transient peak. Well, there's an initial peak at the front, and then it slopes off. So if you run it backwards, you're magnetizing the peak more efficiently. I hope that sort of.
So that actually results in a little less distortion, right?
Correct. Your peak information is a lot clearer and more more defined. So once we did that and we played that back, Dolly and I both looked at each other and went, "Well, there it is,"
Mm-hmm.
as it should be.
Yeah.
That's how it worked.
Chris, your idea was so good. It's becoming the standard to transfer masters backwards now. So you had a really sound principle there.
Well, that's what I was going to ask Chris. I mean, how often do you transfer the masters backwards in your practice?
Not very, but only in situations like this, where we don't have actual access to the original tape. It's the only other choice. Yeah. Now, to be just a quick side note on that, I actually learned that little theory back in the mid '70s when I was hired on as a second engineer, if you will, and we made a lot of radio spots, and we used to run them backwards, just for that reason, because they snapped better. They had more enthusiastic audio, if you will, for radio, and it caught their attention. So that's how I first learned it, and it still works.
Steve,
yes.
Steve, when you were talking about delay, and thanks for mentioning that, Chuck, that was part of the other delay, because we got our first transferred and we weren't happy or fully content, and we were discussing what was missing, what could be done better. So we had to go back and do a request for a second transfer, and the time to get the second transferred backward probably took 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So there were additional delays.
And that's the thing. I know as consumers, we grow a little bit impatient. Why don't you just get this and press it right away? It's a long process to go from probably attaining the license, dealing with, in this case, the estate, dealing with Sony, and then actually getting access to the tape to copy. I mean, how long of a process is that? So the folks know on average what you guys do at Impex to get it from initial negotiations to in the hands of Chris Bellman to master.
it's project by project. It varies. It also depends if I'm working with the label directly, or I'm working with label and artists, or like a project where the artist is coming to me and say, we want you. To give you a timeline, I'm just going to ink on a project with Warner Brother, with WEA, that we started in, I think, 2020, and I just got clearance.
Hold on. So that's 5 years ago. What?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And even when you're working with artists, you can go in strong, and then there would be they could be busy. They're thinking about it. They want to remix. I'm working on another project where the mix is done. Now we're going back and remix. These are also a lot of added costs that people don't see. People think, well, okay, it's $40, $60, $100. It's a lot. But every time we do a new ref, a new test, and if I hear one tick, I'm asking the pressing plan to loop. If I hear 2 tick, if Donnelly gives me a report 2 or more tick, we're making a new stamper or a new lacquer. These are consistent added costs, but that's what we need to go through to bring a really quiet, dynamic, flat record. But still, records is not a perfect format.
No.
Yeah.
And that's the thing all the time that's brought up on my show is, the cost of vinyl's gone up so much. But like I'm hearing, there is a process, and things do cost money for that process. And it's not like you guys are asking a lot of money for this 50th anniversary Fogelberg.
Right.
No, I mean,
and there's only 3,000 copies.
It's really important for people to consider the quality of what they're getting in a vinyl LP today, as opposed to what it was in 1980 or 81, when they were really mass producing albums. That was the other than cassette, that was the preferred format. And, stampers that shouldn't have been used were used. And am I right, Chris? You were probably cutting tons more of individual albums, specific albums back then than you do now. We're doing very limited pressing.
A standard album order for not an audio release, if you will, audiophile release. There was 6 sets of lacquers created and pressed at 3 different plants. The CBS plants.
Yeah.
So
this is back in the 80s, pre-86, I guess this is happening right before the CD really came into the fold. Okay.
And that really speaks to quality control, because if you have 3 different plants and they're pressing the same record, there's going to be differences between each plant. The raw materials they're using. I think what people have to consider, and I think the real audiophiles do, is the fact that what we're giving them today is almost a handcrafted product. The QC, totally. Chris explained, there was a big search. We were missing the master, the original master, for one side of the album. And, we poked and prodded at Sony to see if they could find it. They couldn't. They had safeties. So, even something like that, Chris and Bob Donnelly are not going to sit back and just take something that's inferior. We're going to take the extra time and effort. We're going to look for the master tape. And then, as AB said, QC is so important. But we're pressing, a few thousand albums, and the vinyl quality is much better, and the pressing standards are better. So, it's a handcrafted product in a lot of ways.
Well, let me stop you there, Chuck. So that goes to the pressing, AB, of this record, Fidelity Record Pressings.
Yes, it's Fidelity Record Pressing in Oxnard. This is our second project with them. They pressed a Modern Cool, a Patricia Barber Modern Cool, on 33 for us last month, and they have done a wonderful job. And they know how important this project is to Impex, to me. So they were meticulous with care. Our test pressing sounded great, and couldn't be more happy.
See, I like hearing this as a consumer, and I'm a big consumer of these audiophile records, as we all know. I love the enthusiasm of you guys. The ones that are putting this all together. And as a consumer, to know that, you're putting in that tender, loving care, that TLC. I've heard nothing but great things, and the records that I have from Fidelity Record Pressings as well have sound really good. And I'm really liking this. Is this the original label that was used from the 50th 50 years ago? So you guys left it the same, or is it different?
No, it's the original.
Nice. So that's the,
Steve, we, part of the success of this release, and we were able to get what we have really is the support of iconic artist group and Sony Music. We have them behind us, and that makes a world of difference.
Yeah, this was almost a personal pet project of Irving Azoff's. This was an important record for Dan, and I think this was something that Irving really wanted to bring back in a very special way.
Yeah. For those who don't know Irving,
Yep.
Irving Azoff is probably one of the most important, businessman, manager in our industry, and he represents, God, the list is extensive over 50 years. I mean, you got the Eagles, you got Bruce Springsteen, U2, Steely Dan, Harry Styles. The list just goes on. Dan was a personal friend, his second client, and so I think this project.
They were college roommates, weren't they? They went to the same college together
Yes,
before they even became famous.
Right.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So
Irving so believed in Dan and his
Yeah.
talent. And, it was a very interesting moment, because if you think about that time in American music, there was this shift towards, bands who were not the traditional, rock band in the vein of the Rolling Stones. And all of a sudden, the music changed, but because of the marketing and the fact that you had people like Irving Azoff and Jerry Weintraub on the concert side, everything exploded. The Eagles started to just sell millions of records. And, that kind of was a thing that was more reserved for the top tier artists. And I think Irving really turned things around. He is certainly a pivotal figure in this change in the way music in America was consumed and marketed.
Speaking of the Eagles, I mean, there's a big Eagles connection, guys, to this record we haven't even talked about yet. Number one,
it was bring that up.
Right. It was produced by none other than Mr. Joe Walsh. I mean, that is in itself, I think, the way he produced that record really brought the most out of, I think, Fogelberg as well. And I want both Chris and maybe Chuck to expand on that.
Chris, you start.
I was gonna. It's funny you bring that up, Steve, because I was gonna mention that, and I see somebody in comments mentioned that Joe Walsh does definitely deserve a lot of credit. He co-produced that record, I believe, with Fogelberg, and the results were quite amazing. And he pulled in some of the Eagles for backgrounds. It's a who's who on that record. I can't even remember. All
Don Henley drums on, I think it's Better Change. He drums in Better Change, and his backing vocals on the song Better Change, and he's also on the song Someone's Been Telling Stories as well. I think too, Joe Walsh is on 10 of the 11 tracks as well, either in some form or not.
Jerry Beckley from America.
Right. Oh, that's right.
Is on the album. Again, America was, red hot at that moment. We got
Graham Nash on harmony and on part of the plan in The Long Way.
Yeah.
Glenn Fry's backing vocals on the song Someone's Been Telling Stories. So you really have an Eagles-ish connection. It's almost an Eagles song in that. I mean, everyone's part of that. Randy Meisner's on, I guess, track 11. There's a Place in the World for a Gambler. So there's a lot, big Eagles connection on this record. So it could be sort of a part 2 Eagles record in a way, right?
Yeah. Well, and as Mazzy says, Walsh wasn't part
wasn't
of
an Eagle yet. I
That's
understand.
true, but they were all buds, so it was a matter of time.
But that was the great thing, is that I think Irving was the glue that brought all of these tremendous artists and musicians together. And when I interviewed the musicians who played on this record, they were all so complimentary of Dan, because Dan wasn't just a pop singer. He was a true musician. If you look at the number of instruments that Dan actually plays on this record, you say to yourself, wow. I mean, the guy could play horns, he could play percussion, he played guitar, he sang.
Well, he did acoustic guitar, organ, acoustic piano, electric guitar, vibraphone, a
Right.
Moog synthesizer. I mean, he was all over it.
No, all
Yep.
over it. And, you know, he came from a musical family. His dad was a music teacher and a band director.
Hmm.
And by his own admission, he spent a lot of time at his father's knee when he was directing the marching band. And, you know, he just had this innate sense of songwriting. And that's a craft unto itself. You can be a great musician. It doesn't mean you're a great songwriter. And Dan was both. And that's really something, you know, when you're talking about the musicians on this record who ended up playing with everyone and touring for 40 and 50 years together, you know, you look at each of them, and you know, some of them played with Elvis, some of them played with, you know, some of the biggest musicians in history, and all of them said they had tremendous respect for Dan and his songwriting ability. They were really touched by the emotion and the honesty behind his songs. So I think that comes through in this record. I think even more than some of his later albums. Although I was weaned on his later albums. That's how I discovered Dan, and then I worked backwards, and you know, got the early albums. But to me, this is just such a beautifully emotional record, and
It is.
just knocked out by what Chris did and Bob did, because you know, of course, listening to it when we transferred it in the studio was really difficult because we were listening to it backwards. But it's good to hear it
Did
the
you take
right way now.
So Chuck, did you take some Tylenol before you started this? I would have.
No,
my
it's
gosh.
it is an interesting thing. But you know,
Yeah.
again, one of my favorite records growing up was "They're Coming to Take Me Away," haha, which we're all of an age where, if you remember the Warner Brothers single, when you turned it over, it was not only played backwards on the second side, on the B side, but the label was printed backwards. So I had a little experience with that. But really, it sounds terrific, better than I have ever heard it. And to me, it was an honor and a privilege to put a little bit of my stamp and the way I approach reissues and writing about historic albums and sessions on this.
Well, I want to just say that as well. I mean, one of the things, you know, people talk about how expensive records are, and this one, for what we're getting, and of course the sound is amazing, the pressing's amazing, it's mastered beautifully, of course. But again, you're getting these liner notes and detailed liner notes, Chuck. I mean, you did your research first of all on this, and you go into great essay on
Thank you.
Fogelberg, great essay on Souvenirs and all the players involved in this record as well, and some really cool picks, AB, as well, that I think you had to get licensed, because these aren't stuff that you get from the original record. I was told by you as well. So this is stuff that you guys got after.
As a matter of fact, Sony Music, where I've worked for 33 or 34 years, has almost no photos from these sessions or from this album. So one of the key figures that I interviewed for these notes was the photographer Henry Diltz.
Yeah.
And he provided us with, I don't know, maybe 100 or so images, AB?
No, not that many.
Not that many.
But he provided us quite a few for us to peruse and review, and quality was good. Of course, we had to do some touch up, but the quality was good.
Yeah, and Henry, you know, I think one of the most interesting stories that I gleaned in my research and in doing the interviews for these notes was the fact that Henry was already an established photographer. He was doing work in the music industry and well respected. And one afternoon, this guy just appeared, and it happened to be Dan Fogelberg, who was renting a house across the street from Henry Diltz. Dan is ready to do this album, and he walks up to Henry. Oh, he walked up to Henry's wife, who was home and in the driveway getting out of her car, and he said, do you know where Henry Diltz lives? I know he lives in this. And the woman said, well, yeah, he lives right here. My husband. And he said, well, I'm Dan Fogelberg, and I'm a singer, and I'm doing an album, and I wanted to do the cover. And Henry then tells me that for several weeks before this occurred, he had been coming home, and when he got out of his car, he was hearing this beautiful piano playing coming from across the street. And he wondered who was playing, but he knew the gentleman who owned the house, and he knew that he would rent it out to musicians. And I just thought that was an amazing thing. And they basically, shot this album cover. Henry had a unique way of working. He would just go out with whoever his subject was, whether it was a band or an individual artist, and he would just shoot pictures while they ambled through a field. Hence, that beautiful cover on America's Homecoming. They went out for maybe, 2 days and just walked around, and he would just snap pictures, kind of randomly. But for the photo that is on the cover of Souvenirs, he said that he and Dan were literally sitting in the living room of that house, and there were all sorts of little artifacts that the owner of the house had on the tables, and Dan just picked up that feather. And it was not like Henry said, pose with that feather. That would be a good prop.
Yeah.
It was like they were just talking back and forth. And as they're talking, Henry was snapping pictures, and Dan picked up this feather from the table in front of him, and Henry just captured it. And it's so evocative and perfect. And, to me, not being able to interview Dan Fogelberg, I'm looking, and I used to be a photographer, so I'm looking at this photo and I'm saying, this is so natural. He's leaning in. You can see that there's a conversation happening there.
And that's what I got out of this too. If you listen to the record and you look at this photo, it's just a very honest photo of him.
Absolutely.
If you know what I mean? And so it really goes well with when you're listening to the Souvenirs record and the lyrics, and it really captures it. Just to move on a little bit with Henry Diltz. I mean, I think who put it up here? Henry shot most of the Laurel Canyon artists.
Absolutely.
But also, too, one of the most famous, iconic records he shot, or album covers he shot, was the Morrison Hotel record cover. If people
Correct.
don't know, right? So that was
one of my favorite albums of all time. The Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young album. Where they're sitting out on the couch.
That's right. I love that one.
That's Henry. I mean, just he is just a gem in terms of being a visual artist. And, you could tell, just in speaking to him, he really loved Dan Fogelberg's music and loved Dan, because he ended up working with him a lot and doing more of his album covers and concert photography.
A lot of people love Dan. He knew
Yes.
what he wanted. He was firm. He was respectful, and he was earnest. He was very earnest, open-hearted.
Listen, I was 15 years old, and I was.
Don't date yourself, Chuck. Don't.
Well,
date yourself. Come on.
Listen, but I was listening. I would listen to Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and pound that stuff out on my drums, and then I'd listen to Dan Fogelberg. I mean, there was such.
That's a contrast.
It's a big contrast, but I think it's not really the genre or the style that matters. And even to me as a 15-year-old, maybe some kids who liked punk rock, which I loved, wouldn't listen to Dan Fogelberg. They'd turn their nose up at it. I thought it was great music. I gave it a chance.
Would you say this is sort of the Laurel Canyon sort of style to it, like lyrically
Absolutely.
and musically? That's really what the Joni Mitchells, the Graham Nash, CSNs, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
They were all tied together.
Yep.
I mean, if you think about it, and if I'm not mistaken, I think the house where Henry lived and where Dan was renting across the street was in Laurel Canyon or near Laurel Canyon.
It was. He moved out there. He rented a little cottage in Laurel Canyon.
The cottage when he was writing this album. And, it's got that vibe. And that's, I think, what I try to bring across in the liner notes. You have all these famous people who, I should say, musicians who became famous because they were in the Eagles and America, and they were great session players. And this is so perfect, a snapshot of that moment, right? Before the Eagles exploded and became super, super famous. And, before Joe Walsh was an Eagle, but it was just all these people who would hang out and hear each other play and
And
listen.
that's exactly what you're saying. That's the inspiration that everyone got out of this, and at us as the listeners got to experience that and their creativity because of them all being together.
Yeah. And you know, I don't think, maybe even I didn't think of Dan as being one of those influential Laurel Canyon artists. Certainly not back when I was listening to him, you know, as a young person. But, you know, his connection there was a lot deeper than I originally thought. So that was a really nice thing to learn, is how this nice musical symbiosis just kind of developed. And I thought the Henry Diltz story was great. You know, he just walks up and says, "Hey, would you happen to know where Henry Diltz lives?" And she's
Love
like, "No."
So again, like everyone knew everyone in the Laurel Canyon back then, right? It was just,
I think it was,
I'm Dan Fogelberg, I'm Henry, I'm Graham Nash. I'm Joni Mitchell. It was no really that big of a deal. You look at it today, it's like, wow, all those people are in the same sort of area.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen.
And we all played on each other's projects.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. Right, because
That's
you know,
the beauty of it. It was just spawned so many different projects. Yeah, it was a
So what studio did they record this album at? Do we know?
I actually don't know.
Yeah.
You know what? No, we have an idea. You know, I have to go back to the liner notes. I have to be honest.
It wasn't
I
Hyder,
think it was
it?
multiple studios.
Yeah.
It was multiple studios.
Okay.
But I took photos of all the tape boxes and stuff. So
Do you have the photos right now, Chuck?
I don't have them right here.
Because we have lots that like to look at tape boxes that watch the show.
Well, you know, I will.
Chris
I'll
knows
send
that.
you, if you want to put them up at the end of the episode, I'll send them to you and you can add them in. It's pretty cool. But I think it was done at multiple studios. You know, I do know some of the musicians came in. They were on the original sessions and they came in and overdubbed stuff and changed things. So,
but a lot of these recordings, from what I can tell, were pretty much live recordings. Was there a lot of overdub, Chris, and all this stuff? Or, I mean, was it pretty much live?
It's pretty hard to tell.
Yeah.
But in those days, it was very common to have someone like that was in that Laurel Canyon group just to show up, and then they go, "Oh, let's put you on this channel. We'll put you over there."
Yeah.
You know, and then, "Oh, can you come over and sing on my record?" Okay, yeah. You know, that happened all the time. So there were probably a fair amount of overdubs going on at any given moment.
But it was, you know, it was really, from what I can ascertain from my interviews, it was really an organic record. Dan came in, he knew what he wanted to hear. He would sit at the piano, he would play it, and then everybody that was in that core group would just fall in. And it was almost like a head arrangement for them, you know, and they would lay it down. And then the beauty of having a Joe Walsh, from what all the musicians said, was that Joe would say, "Oh, we could use a sousaphone here." And he would know exactly who to bring in. And, you know, or there would be some little embellishment that Joe would think of that maybe Dan hadn't. And I think Dan probably loved that, growing up with a father who was a marching band director, because that's exactly what you do. You have all these whistles and bells and little, you know, gleaming accents. And I think that's kind of how this evolved in terms of production. Joe, from what I was told, was really the guy who had a lot of great ideas. And he would say, "Hey, how about if we do a second guitar?" You know, and then he would just go and pick up his own guitar and he would start playing and they would record it. And that was it. It was on there. And when you listen to, I mean, to me, the song that I remember from the first time I listened to this album way, way back was Part of the Plan. And I listened to that song and I'm like, this is so freaking complex as an arrangement. It's just, there's so much going on, but it just moves you. You get this vibe, this energy, and it just sounds great. It makes you feel great. And you know, from every account, that's the way these guys felt in the studio when they were making it. So that's a testament to Dan and, you know, what he kind of wanted for this record.
Well, you mentioned before Dan's dad was, I guess, part of a band as well, or was into really classically trained pianist as well. So it's really helped Dan. But I think what was it, at age 14, his dad let him conduct the school band. I mean,
Yeah.
back when he's 14 years old. So I mean, he just naturally talented.
Absolutely.
Wasn't
Every
his mom
musician.
also a classical pianist? Wasn't Dan's mom also?
Maybe it was Dan's mom.
I
Okay.
think
I think
Dan, yeah, Dan's mom was musical as well.
yes, Dan. So both sides of the parents.
Wow.
were.
Yes. But you know, his dad really was a major influence. I mean, he wrote the song Leader of the Band later for his dad.
That was like in 1981, but even before that, Dan Fogelberg's 14 years old. He's part of a cover band called The Clan doing Beatles covers at 14 years old.
Yeah.
Think about that today. I mean, how many 14-year-olds do you see doing covers of, you know, in a band? I don't see that ever. It just doesn't happen in today. I mean, that's something that happened in the 60s and 70s, right?
Right. I see a lot of 14, 15, and 16-year-olds doing death metal. I don't see a lot of cover bands at that age anymore, you know. But it really is. It's a beautiful record, and you know, I don't know. I just think Dan Fogelberg was one of the most amazing songwriters of our generation. I really wish I had had the opportunity to sit down and really talk to him about music, you know.
So with the success of this record, AB, is there plans? I know it takes a lot of time. Would there be plans for another Fogelberg record at some point?
Well, that's a discussion I'm having that I would like to do, but Fogelberg's catalog is with Sony Music, and Sony Music is currently not doing third-party licensing for a time being. I don't know when the process will begin again. So a future licensing with a Sony artist, you know, may be put on hold. But because of the success of this album, we just got clearance on Thursday to do this album with the bonus materials never been released on SACD, which will be out for the holiday.
And that's a Chris Bellman SACD as well, I'd assume?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Going to be
Wow.
spectacular.
I'm excited about that.
Now, the packaging, of course, on the SACD will be minimized, and we're still trying to figure out how to fit Chuck's fantastic liner note into a little SACD booklet.
You should maybe do that, and you have a little magnifying glass you can include in the SACD, right? Just do it that way.
Robert and I were talking, you know, he was like, we can do this on 9-point font, 8-point. I'm like, and who's going to read that? So we've been trying to figure out what we can.
I can't read it anymore.
I would, you know, I mean, here's a suggestion. You could do like a QR code, and then someone could scan it, and it goes right to your website, and you can see the liner notes that way as well. That would probably work as well. It'd save a lot of money.
And we should do that and present the full essay. I just want to add something because, and it's not because he's watching, but it's because I always have to give Robert Sliger credit, because he is the guy who creates this beautiful vibe in our packaging. And even though this is an original jacket, you know, when you look at the gatefold and you look at the liner notes and the way it's designed and laid out, you know, Robert, it doesn't matter whether it's 1950s Duke Ellington or 1950 Frank Sinatra or current day Patricia Barber or 1970s Dan Fogelberg. He just gets it. He's got such a wonderful way of picking up on the vibe, the integrity, and the little nuances in the design of the era that record came out in. And I think that's a big plus for us. Is Robert Sliger.
Yeah. He takes the music and he tells the story through art. And I'm so blessed and lucky. And I joke, I call him my work husband because we've been working together for 25 years.
You guys, I mean, 25 years. You were telling me that the other day. I was like, holy crow.
No, day in, day out, 25 years. And now, because we both work from home, we see each other every Wednesday, and we kind of start listening to the music. We express, you know, we share how we feel, and he takes the vision and he takes everybody's idea and he packages it into that's time appropriate. And his art tells a story, and that's always been my goal and my vision is that music plays one aspect, but our liner notes, our photo is what, help people immerse into the making of this album. And that's what makes Impex special.
And that's what I always stress when we're talking on my shows about why we like vinyl so much. It's the tangible aspect of it. It's not the streaming. I get to look at this, all these new photos that have never been released before, and read an incredible essay that Chuck wrote about the record itself and all the players in the record. I mean, this is what it's not even costing that much money for what you're getting. So
this should be a $60 record.
It's
there's a lot of
$60 record.
and it's got the lyrics in here too. So you definitely. So Robert, you'll definitely need a QR code, because I want everyone to be able to experience this. They're buying the SACD to experience these full liner notes and be able to read them. So absolutely QR code it. And
look how beautiful that photograph's been touched up. It looks so lifelike. Look how gorgeous.
Yeah, it does. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
I like that one.
We have some nice outtakes from the photo shoots from Henry. You know what I love,
and the lyrics are on it too. If everyone knows, you get the full lyrics.
What I love about this team, which I'm honored and privileged to be a part of, is the fact that we have Chris and Bob create this beautiful natural vibe. No matter what the music is, it could be jazz, it could be vocal, it could be rock, it could be folk. And then we have Robert creating this great vibe, visually. It's just perfect. It's really, to me, Impex. It's the reason I wanted to work with Impex, is because they really do this better than anyone else.
I will say, AB and your team, I was getting back to it before and I mentioned it. It's the passion and the enthusiasm that you guys have for each record that you do, and it shows in the quality. I mean, how many bad Impex records do you ever hear about? None.
Well, you have to remember.
I mean, seriously, they're amazing.
We're not. It's not like someone at a record label is assigning us to do this work. We're choosing the records that we want to do. So every record is important to all of us for different reasons, right? I mean, Chris, you're a legend in this industry. So
there you go, Chris.
How many records have you mastered? But you have favorites, right? But you always come up with the perfect way.
Well, Chuck, I'm going to ask Chris again, just so that remind the viewers. Chris, how many years has it been since you became a mastering engineer? When did you start?
1974.
So I was 1 year old, Chuck.
I was 11.
I'm not going to say
just showed my age.
That is
now.
Absolutely unbelievable to have experience of
that's
50,
the gray, right?
50 years old. Chris basically started the year this record came out.
Yep.
That's true.
When I go back and I flip through my record collection, I mean, Chris mastered a lot of my favorite records that I just.
And Chris, you look 60, so I mean, you don't age.
No, you don't. You look younger than me, Chris.
Unbelievable.
You're doing well here, but no, this
music. It's the music.
It is the music. But the thing is, we don't have to work on music that we're not passionate about, and I think that's part of the reason why everybody gets so excited about this.
I do.
Well, you do.
So Chris, hang on. So Chris, I mean, 50 years doing this, you go to work every single day, still excited about your next project, I bet, even 50 years out.
I do. That's the beauty of the gig. I never know what I'm going to get when I push play. And sometimes I'm really pleasantly surprised, and other times I'm like, okay, this is going to be one of those, but all in all, I'm listening to music and I'm getting them to make it sound as good as I can. And it's a great gig.
So getting back to Souvenirs, were you surprised at what you needed to do? Because you were mentioned before, it wasn't just an easy process like we learned about from the beginning. Was it a surprise to you when you first dusted off those tape boxes?
Yes and no. Okay. I was just looking at my EQ notes that I happen to have here.
Cool.
And to be honest, once we found the proper source, there wasn't a whole lot to do. Those tapes were really nice.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of low end focus maybe and some de-essing for the vinyl, and that was pretty much it. And leveling out song to song level wise. But other than that, it was all there. It was well recorded, and the vibe was there, so it was just a matter of pulling the vibe off the tapes and getting it to the acetate.
I have
So
to
it wasn't
tell
that difficult once we found it.
So,
the
okay,
harder part was finding the right source.
Right. And then from there, you get these test pressings. And so these test pressings, where do they go out to, AB? Like, who gets them and who gets the final say before we're like, okay, let's give our lacquer to Fidelity?
So the process starts with, sometimes Chuck is involved in the transfer. Sometimes I work with another engineer called Andreas Myers from Swan Studio. Or is it Myers Studio or Swan Studio, Chuck? Swan Studio.
Yeah.
And once we get the tape, it gets sent to the engineer we're working with. It could be Chris, it could be Bernie, it could be Kevin. And then the process starts. We like to be present during mastering. That's just one of those things that I insist the team loves.
So you were there with Chris then?
We were there with Chris. We like to hear what we're getting. We like to be involved in the mastering. Bob has a lot of opinions.
No.
Bob has great ears.
He does.
How things should sound. He is the ear. I tell people it's, Impex sound is Bob's signature. Bob has a lot of say in how things sound. Once Chris is done with mastering, we get a test ref that Bob takes home and evaluates it on his 3 different systems. And then the conversation's mainly
That is such an important point.
Okay, go back and talk about that with Bob Donnelly then. I will say too, Bob Donnelly has to be the most honest person too when it comes to his listening to records. Like, he'll tell you how it is no matter what, which is amazing. And Chris knows too. He's shaking his head. It's so true.
Chris said to me one time, who's the mastering engineer?
No. That just does not shock me about Bob Donnelly.
Chris, how many of your clients, take a lacquer ref home?
For a vinyl project, I would say 20%.
So a very limited amount.
And I didn't want to interrupt AB, but that is a key because, as Bob says, and he's absolutely right, because I've worked in the studio, doing projects outside of Impex for 32 years. A lot of it was digital. Now the LP thing is great. And there's a difference. I mean, when you take a lacquer home and you listen to it on your system that's attuned to your ears, you really understand the sound. And that's a step that almost nobody does. But Bob does it.
We definitely do. And, I don't want to detour the conversation about money, but that is definitely another layer of expense. Chris's time, the lacquer, the shipping. So we take home the lacquer, Bob evaluates, and then the conversation pretty much runs between Bob and the engineer on any changes, EQ. Once Bob gives me the green light, I tell Chris or, whoever to cut the lacquer. Lacquer gets shipped, gets plated. We get test pressing. Test pressings usually are divided between Bob and myself. So Bob is the go-to. He listens to the test pressing.
And me.
And Chris, the engineer. I get it. And then Slager gets a copy. Sometimes Chuck gets, just depends on who's involved in the project and how deep. So there's all of us listening to the test pressings. And if we all have the same notes, whether it's pass or fail.
That's what I was going to ask you. So you guys all take notes of listening to this test pressing and get together and say, hey, I'm hearing this or I'm hearing that, and come together on a conclusion as to what you want it to sound like at times?
Well, no, usually it's Bob. So we get one set first, and Bob listens to every test pressing, not just one, listen to all of it. If he says, wow, it's perfect, then sometimes I don't have time to
hang on. Bob Donnelly says it's perfect. It doesn't happen all the time.
Okay, no, it rarely happens. Actually, we were accusing one. He says there's a tick 2 second into the lead of the first track. That's a no-go. I'm like, it's 2 seconds. But yes, Bob listens to it first. And if there's a problem, that's when all of us jump in and we evaluate together to make sure that we're all hearing the same problem. If there's no problem, we'll get to the test pressing when we have time. But Bob takes the lead on that. There are titles I have cut as many 6 sets of test pressings where we had to make new stampers, problem with stamper, new lacquers, green sleeve, for example. I think we might be sold out. Impex green sleeve, 6 set of stampers.
Wow. Amazing.
Question for you as well. So again, pressed at Fidelity. Who plated it? So for the
RTI.
RTI. So
RTI
Doran at RTI.
Doran at RTI.
Yeah.
The QC was also involved. Bryce. Bryce is my my go-to when there's QC questions. He's fantastic. Fidelity pressed it, and of course the jacket and booklet is at Stoughton Printing. They've been my go-to since the 90s.
Yeah.
I love them.
Absolutely beautiful too. And again, the original, so everyone knows, and I learned this today, was not a gatefold. So this is original to Impex. This picture here, I guess you guys got it licensed. Tell me about the inner part of this. Like, what are we looking at for this picture? Like, what is it?
That
Who did it?
I believe, and Robert is on, and he can confirm this, but Dan Fogelberg was a multi-dimensional artist, and he did fine art and painting. And if I'm not mistaken, is that Robert Sliger? Is that from one of his paintings? I think it was.
Let's see.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, I'm with you, Christopher.
Yeah, I'll see. Chris,
It's so fun for me to watch. I've worked with some of the best engineers in the business, and the first time I got to work with Chris, it was like what I imagined it was.
painting from the inner LP sleeve.
Yeah, and that was done by Dan.
That's
So
a
that
Dan.
picture is a Dan Fogelberg painting.
I love it on the calendar. You circled a Sunday for some reason. See that? Sunday the 13th. I don't know what the
Wild.
meaning of that is.
Robert, why are you holding a blue note on your picture? Why not an Impex?
Why not an Impex?
Oh, you see that? Yeah. Robert.
Robert, if you pull up his comment, you know, his photos.
Oh, so the original was a gatefold. Is that my, sorry. It was a gatefold, the original then? I just want to make that clear. No?
I'm waiting.
I think it was a gatefold.
Okay.
It wasn't a
Someone
single. I thought it was.
Someone else is saying, yeah, Souvenirs was a gatefold in its 70s edition.
70s,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, I stand corrected.
So Dan actually, I think the painting on the cover of The Innocent Age is also one of Dan's own paintings, I believe. 99% certain. So I was saying, watching Chris Bellman work was like what I imagine it was watching Jim Boyer and Phil Ramone work back in the 70s, because he was there's no automation in this process, and he is so fast, and he's pulling down the level at the end of the song, the fade out, and then he's real quick hitting the EQ, and he's amazing to watch work. And it's just like, I love the wizardry. And yeah, no.
Your first project was with Chris on the Frank Sinatra, right?
Yes.
Singing Dance with Frank.
Yeah.
So.
Which sounds great.
Project.
Yeah, and it wasn't a perfect source, right, Chris? I mean, it was a very early tape master from April of 1950. Columbia, I think, was probably only a few months into recording on tape, and it was overdubbed to which was even more kind of astounding because of the time period. And
mono, of course.
It was mono, and it had some tape saturation. They really hit the levels hard. But
that's an ask, yeah.
Chris knew exactly what to do, and he made it sound great. And the one thing I remember, Chris, is when I came back and we cut the 45 version, and you put the tape up, and you went to the cutter for a test, and you said, "Oh, this I just hear it sounds so great in 45." Like you immediately nailed it. Like it was perfect. And I just love the way you work. That's it.
Thank you. I have a fan.
Steve, can I mention when we're talking about jacket, I posted on Impex social media. So on the back of the jacket, there's a little box, Stoughton, hand stamped every individual serial number.
So limited to 3,000, AB, limited to 3,000.
Hey, mine isn't stamped. What's going on?
We were lucky enough to get promos for this show. So
you guys got it. Chris and I haven't even seen the finished product. It never arrived.
Looks great.
So you have it. We haven't seen it. I'm just seeing the working parts.
It looks great.
Will mine be stamped?
No, you're not
Probably
getting a
not.
stamp one. Who gets number one? Does Bob Donnelly get the first one then?
He should.
I think it's up to the.
Definitely.
It's up to the elusive disc how they disperse. We disperse. I think it's order on first come first serve. I don't know how they do.
I think in this case, Irving Azoff should get number one. So,
Yeah.
That's a good point. Or the family
for the
estate.
family.
Thank you for ordering the Fogelberg Modern Cool. You won't be disappointed with Modern Cool. It is fantastic. The best version.
Who mastered that?
Bernie.
Mhm.
Bernie Grundman.
Here you go. Pat saying Jean, which is Dan's wife,
Yeah.
and Irving should get number one and Irving number two.
I think they iconic artists. We were able to get approval where the artist allotment shipped directly from the pressing plant, so they already received theirs probably a week and a
Oh,
half.
cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
So,
I'd be curious to hear Jean's thoughts on the record as well.
I don't know what her thoughts about the record, but I know she was involved in approving the liner notes, the artwork.
Okay.
We sent her files to make sure that she was happy. We sent everything to Iconic Artists, who forwarded to Jean.
Oh, and we got some really wonderful comments for the liner notes from Irving about
Yes.
that early time and what he remembered, and how warmly he felt about not just Dan, but also, bringing this record to fruition. So that was really a coup for us.
Yeah.
And Pat thinks Walsh should get number three. Abe.
Well, that's up to you.
Come on, Joe. Come on up if you're watching. I'd like to pick your brain about this session that you did. That'd be amazing. Well, we did it. We did a top of the hour already, guys. See
Great.
how it goes. See
That
how
went
it
by
goes.
so fast.
Didn't I tell you that when we were chatting the other day, AB, how quickly this goes? But where do we order? Where do we pre-order this before it's all gone?
So you can pre-order through elusivedisc.com or any of your favorite online retail stores. I know all our major distributors like Acoustic Sound, Mobile Fidelity also carries the In Groove. And for those who don't play vinyl, don't have a turntable, the SACD will be out around Christmas time.
Which
And
would be
it's
exciting.
shipping next Friday, the 13th.
Next Friday.
On his birthday. Well,
and
the
the-
birth date.
And the SACD
Yeah.
will have bonus tracks to it. Mention
Yes.
that.
Yes, bonus, which was you can stream it, I think, right now, the
Okay.
bonus track. And it's never been released until the 50th.
So that's one question. So the streaming service, would that be a Chris Bellman remaster on the streaming side too, as for the 50th anniversary? Does that work like that?
The
Or is that
streaming has
something
nothing to
something
do with
different?
Impex.
Okay.
The streaming has nothing to do. I only have rights for physical product.
Okay.
But and people have heard me say this before, Impex is a boutique audiophile label. We put out 6-8 titles a year. And for me, as a parent, I always say every release is like a child from birth to college. And we spend a lot of time. We're never in a rush. And we want to make sure we do it right. And I always curate the team that's right for the project. And I think this team for the Fogelberg couldn't have come together better. And I wish Bob was here. But yeah.
Again, guys, I want to thank you, but I also want to just let the viewers know I'm just feeling the enthusiasm. AB's enthusiasm, of course, Chuck. I mean, you articulated perfectly what the Souvenirs record's all about and the processes. Chris, thank you for all of that as well. I think this has been an incredibly informative hour, and I really hope that you guys go out and get the Souvenirs record. It's worth it. For how much is it going for?
$40.
Come on, $40.
It should be a $60
This is
record.
40. Okay, this is $40. It's ridiculous.
This
Anyways,
is about honoring the artists.
Yeah.
It's about being a champion for the artists and a state. This is not about making money. This is about doing great work.
I appreciate everything that you guys are doing for the vinyl industry, for the audiophile industry. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. Viewers, thank you so much. Amazing.
You're
And
such a great champion. So thank you.
well, thank you.
Yeah,
No,
thanks, Steve.
I appreciate that, guys. I mean, I'm just just a guy from Vancouver, Canada that loves records. And, we were talking before we got on. I love the relationships I have with all of you because of what I do as well. And I appreciate all the support you guys have given me over the last number of years as well, and the friendships you've given me as well. So I wanted to thank you for that. And of course, thank you for entrusting me in doing this show and showing the Souvenirs record. I think it's going to be a great success, and I'm excited for everyone to share and listen to this record. So thank you, everyone.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. All right, guys. Thank you for watching.
Bye, guys.
Have a great weekend.
Saturday.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.